Hello, welcome to Gardener's World on a lovely cold and clear day here at Berryfields. Although I'm starting here in the greenhouse because we're looking at the results of our chilli trial. We grew lots of different types of chilli this year, but there are three that were important in the trial. There was New Mix Twilight, Fiesta and Joe's Long. And as well as our own results here, we also shall be looking at the results of the many of you who took part in the trial as well. And on top of the chilies, I will be having a good look around Berryfields, taking stock on what we've achieved this year, and also considering some of the options for next year.
And I'm going to be collecting loads of berries from our native shrubs and trees around the place so we can make our own native hedge entirely from seed.
And I'll be adding a touch of formality to the courtyard garden with some strong structural evergreen planting, but it won't cost the earth.
Right, let's take stock of the results of our own chilli trial here at Berryfields. And we'll start with Fiesta. Now, you can see by this time of year, our Fiesta grown in the greenhouse has become quite a lanky plant. They started out good and compact, and these lovely red fruits. Now, the point of the trial with Fiesta was to see how many fruits could grow on one bush. Well, we've counted these and reckon there are 80 on here. And I suspect that you could get more, and other people have. But it's a tricky one, because when they're red, they're ripe, and so you pick them, and the more you pick, the more fruits it will produce. So to get maximum fruits off a plant, the secret is to keep picking them and keep a tally. And by the way, there's no virtue on keeping the fruit on the plant once it's red. It's fully ripe and should be eaten. But it's grown well, no trouble whatsoever. Next was Joe's Long. Now, this is my favourite. Now, the purpose of the trial was quite specifically to find who could grow the longest individual fruit. We have got one that's longer than all the others, and I will reveal that to you later. But again, a good plant. New Mix Twilight is remarkably similar to Fiesta. Now it's mature, but of course the colours have evolved through oranges and yellows and that curiously metallic purple to this bright red. It's a slightly more squat plant than Fiesta, and the point of the trial we had here was to see whether it grew as well inside or outside. So, to see our results, let's go and compare them. Now, while these have been snug in the greenhouse, the outdoor ones have been roughing it in the vegetable garden. Right, let's have a look. Now, the first thing you can't help but notice is that the indoor one is quite tall, even leggy, and is evenly covered with very well-ripened fruits. And yet these outdoor ones, grown in exactly the same size pots, in the same growing medium, are much smaller. The leaves are smaller, and they look almost as though they've been shriveled up. Yet, they're reasonably healthy. They are covered in fruit, but these fruits are at various stages of ripening. And if you compare the ones that we planted directly into the soil, now they are really different. They're bushier, the leaves are smaller, the whole plant is more compact, but it's very healthy and smothered in fruit, but noticeably much, much less ripening. So I think the conclusion to draw is that if you want a plant with evenly ripened fruits all coming together in the autumn, you need to grow it under some kind of protection. But if you want a healthy, rather more compact plant with a lot of fruits that you can then ripen on after you take them off the plant, you might as well grow them outside. Right, well, so much for our trials here at Berryfields, but let's take our first look at how some of you have got on with your trials at home.
About half the height as the chilies grown in the miniature greenhouse. It has approximately the same number of chilies, but they haven't ripened as much.
And 80% of you who grew Fiesta said you've been eating the fruit and you have enough to last you right through to next year. Now, I'm here in the courtyard garden. As you come in through the door, there's not enough impact for me. I want to try and formalise it, get some height into the garden. And I was thinking about using topiary. 4 topiary pieces would look fantastic, but topiary is either really slow growing if you buy it small and you're going to use box or yew, or it's incredibly expensive, and you've got to think about the pots as well. So I found a really cost-effective way to create the same effect. Some of this foliage through just to get it going, but I would expect within a year for the ivy to completely cover this structure, be up and over the top, and then all you have to do is just lightly trim it when it gets a little bit messy. But you could go for any shape that you wanted, really. You could go for a column, you could go for a cone or a pyramid, but make sure that it fits and it works well with the shape of the pot.
I'm picking loads of berries off this hawthorn tree, and I'm going to go right around the place and find as many native berries as I can, because I want to make a native hedge. Now, we've already planted one, but when we did that, we used plants that were bought in, young saplings, and put them all in together, lots of different varieties. But this time, we're going to do the whole thing ourselves, from scratch. Me and my brothers used to use this for ammunition for our catapults, and then it was really hard, but because these have been frosted, they've already softened and they're ideal for sowing straight away. You can collect berries and seeds from any native shrubs and trees to include in your hedge. I'm collecting sloes, hawthorn, spindle, holly and rose hips to start with. You could even include acorns or conkers. Big trees are no problem, since they'll never achieve more than the height of the hedge. Now, I've got this box here, which I think is the ideal sort of place to sow these berries. You could sow them just in pots of ordinary compost, put them in a cold frame or the greenhouse, but the great thing is about sowing them into a specially prepared seed bed like this. You can get these seeds to germinate much more quickly because they're going to be chilled by the cold weather. They've got this wonderful depth of soil, and also in this lovely mixture you can include masses of leaf mould. And leaf moulds are a really important constituent because as these little trees develop, they have a symbiotic relationship with the soil around them. Now, nothing could be simpler really. You can just take your berries, as I said before. These hawthorn higs are already soft and squidgy. You can either break the seed coat off or just put the whole berry on the top of the soil and make a little row of them. I'm leaving a few inches between them, but it's not crucial, it doesn't really matter. And you don't have to label anything because as things germinate and grow up, you'll be able to tell immediately what they are. So you can put a good mix in here. I suppose if you're just growing these berries for trees, you'd have to be very careful. You wouldn't need to grow too many. But we're going to put our trees and shrubs into a hedge, and there you can really plant intensively. And the great thing is that not only can you plant lots and lots, but you can really get a big diversity of different species in there. Because the more interesting and the more full of different species your hedge is, the more diverse the kind of wildlife it's going to attract. They make a wonderful boundary between gardens, and they're full of interest all year round. And now we're going to do some rose hips. Now, when you squash these rose hips, you can see all these seeds here. It's great to have some climbers growing through your hedge too, and I suppose the wild rose is one of the best you could have, but each hip contains lots and lots of separate seeds, but they'll work much better, they'll germinate more efficiently if you actually take the pith off. So just wash them round in a bowl of water first, collect the seeds together and then sow them. All berries need a period when they're actually stratified or chilled, and this helps break that dormancy. Well, if you sow your seed in a little pot and put it into a warm place, it will germinate eventually, but it might take years and years. But this way, in this box, which is going to stay outside all winter long, they'll really, really get chilled through. And then I'm going to cover the whole thing with a nice layer of grit. And that will retain moisture underneath. It'll let the cold through though, and it'll make sure that any weeds that come along can be pulled out easily, because these babies might be in here for quite a long time. When eventually they've grown, you can transplant them when they're about this high and put them straight into your native hedge. Well, I really hope this experiment's going to be successful, but we know you've had success with your chilies.
Well, it does seem that Rosemary Pitt's Joe's Long is the longest of our viewers so far. And I have a nasty feeling it's longer than the longest that we've grown here at Berryfield. But I'll just check, and I happen to have a tape measure on me, because our longest fruit is out here in the border. Now, it's green, but there's nothing in the rules that says it has to be ripe, it just has to be long. And if I measure that, I think we can conservatively say 30 and probably stretch to 31 if we straightened it out. In fact, quite a few were over 30, and the average was about 25 centimetres. But there is still one that is longer to come. As a matter of interest, when it came to Joe's Long, 83% of you said that you were completely happy with the way that they grew. Most of you grow them in a greenhouse, most of you grew them to eat, and there were a few pest and disease problems, but in general, you'd grow it again. Now, these are not going to keep. We've had a couple of nights frost on them. They're not going to ripen anymore outside, they won't grow anymore, so I'm going to dig these up. But it wasn't just the viewers that took part in our trial. The RHS also grew chilies along with you and us here at Berryfield. And we went to see them, first of all at Hyde Hall, and then at their base at Wisley.
We split the trial from the sort of beginning. We wanted to put 50% under glass and 50% outside and sort of try and draw a comparison and see how they came out. We actually found this year that stuff that was grown outside have done significantly sort of better than the plants that were indoors. We've had a better sort of fruit set on them, better flowering, a healthier sort of more leafy, stronger looking plant. We found that probably the best one that sort of to grow for the amount of fruit that you were looking for would either be your Numex Twilight or the Fiesta. Counted one the other day, sadly, just to see how many we had. And we had somewhere in the region between 150 and 160 fruits on that. The way we grow the chilies here is we basically just pot them on into a fairly heavy loam kind of soil, mixed with green waste and a slight amount of bark to that. So we grow several different cultivars as well. It's been really, really easy to grow for us this year. Hardly any work at all. Just put them in the containers, make sure they're watered every day, every other day, and away you go.
Well, here we are at Wisley looking at the chili trial, which has done fantastically well this year. This is Joe's Long, and this is the longest that's been produced at any of the RHS gardens. It is 38 centimetres long. It's looking a bit shriveled now because it's been picked for a week. And if you look at the other ones in my other hand, how lovely they look when they're fresh. This is an extremely good variety if you want to grow long chilies. It's easy to grow. It tends to want a little bit more support than the others. It's rather tall.
Well, I think that the RHS can claim the prize for the longest Joe's Long chili. 38 centimetres is the winner. Now, back here at Berryfields, you will remember that we've decided to make what was formerly Rachel's garden and plant it up in pinks and burgundies into a green garden. Now, the idea of that is not just an area of evergreen plants, but to use the full spectrum of green, whether it be as flowers, as deciduous foliage, or using evergreens to carry it through into winter. And what I really am looking for next year is to create a garden that has that balance between the electric vivacity of new green in spring and the calmness you get from green in high summer. We started some very dramatic work on the long borders earlier this autumn. Took everything out of those embeds, and they have been double dug. Now, this is not something you do lightly, but it was necessary because there was a pan and that was stopping the roots develop. And it's part of a procedure that we'll be doing right the way along, not necessarily double digging, but revamping the planting, rethinking it, moving it on so it stays vital and alive. The epic story of the Berryfields pond has continued this summer with more drama. We've had problems with the water since it began, and obviously after a very hot summer like this one, those problems were shown up to be really pretty disastrous. The pond got very low, the bog garden wasn't boggy, and everything was suffering. We got the Pond Conservation Trust to come and visit us and advise us, and what we decided after lengthy debate was to put a new lining in. And we've made the pond smaller, we've made it shallower. We want this to be a really rich area for as varied a range of wildlife as possible. And we were doing very well. We'd almost finished when there was an unexpected twist in the tale. Because we were using topsoil from this mound to spread around the bog garden, and the mound was created in the first place from spoil from the pond, when we discovered that we had a colony of great crested newts. Now they are completely protected, so work stopped instantly. Now, we're not licensed to handle them. We reported them to DEFRA, and because we had the Pond Conservation Trust with us and guiding us, they were able to deal with it because they're licensed to handle them. Now essentially it means that we had to just leave that as it was so as we didn't disturb them. We dug out some soil from here to put round the pond, and in time we'll fill this back in again and clear that. But what we must do is let them hibernate, create a habitat in the pond where they can move and breed next spring, and then when they've gone there, then we can clear this area and create another space where they can hibernate next year. And by the way, we haven't disturbed them at all because the newts that were found here are older than the pond or the mound, so they've come from somewhere else. Now, if you think that you might have great crested newts hibernating in your garden, go to our website and you'll get help on spotting them and also what action to take. We're delighted to have them. They're more than welcome, and we will do everything we can to make sure that they stay here. Now, Berryfields is undergoing a process of change. That's inevitable, that's good. That's really what gardening is all about. But for some gardens, it can be a fairly traumatic experience. And Hadspen in Somerset is one of our great gardens. I was last there about 10 years ago, and it was looking magnificent. And that is about to undergo huge change. And Joe went down to see what's going on.
This is Hadspen House, and it's pretty impressive, but it's the gardens that makes this place world famous. It's got a 2-hectare site, it's south-facing, and it's steeped in history. Generations of serious gardeners have made their mark on Hadspen's garden and landscape. In its most recent history, Sandra and Norrie Pope's unique colourist style attracted and inspired thousands of people. Before the Popes, it was Penelope Hobhouse who, during her 12-year reign in the 1960s and 70s, made the gardens flourish. As the gardens reached a tipping point where nature was beginning to take over before its next renaissance, I arranged to meet Penelope here to get her impressions. This is where you first really started your hands-on gardening.
In a way.
And how does
yes.
it feel to come back to this now?
The shock of walking into this, I haven't been for 6 months, is quite emotional, then wonderful, because we've got the deserted garden, and that's the romance that is in all our souls. To think that a year or year and a half ago, the Popes had this all looking completely beautiful.
What was it like when you first came here?
Well, it was pretty much a jungle. I started along the Peach Walk. And decided, of course, that it should entirely be ornamentals. The soil is basically a sort of stone brash, alkaline, very stony, semi-clay, but because it's been worked so long in the wall garden and somewhere along the beach work, it was easy really to work with, which was great for me because I've never actually gardened on acid soil and I don't really like rhododendrons, so if I grow acid-loving plants at home, I put them in a pot.
If you had the walled garden to do what you wanted with right now,
okay,
how would you approach it?
Well, first of all, I would ask myself what I think a walled garden is for, and for me personally, leaving aside its functions, I would talk about its meaning, and for me it is being enclosed, being safe, it's my refuge, it's my oasis, and it would be extremely like a Mediterranean type garden, which I now have in Dorset.
But it's not down to Penelope. The next chapter in Hadspun's history is to be written by one of you, as this section of the garden, called the Hadspun Parabola, is up for grabs. Penelope's son, Neil Hobhouse, who now owns the estate, is launching a competition to find its next head gardener. OK, Neil, I still can't quite get my bearings.
It's very hard to
I've got the
understand.
plan, yeah, and it's a perfect parabola.
But you have to imagine it running out there to your left.
Okay.
And the confusion is that, of course, it's across a valley, so it's not flat.
What is the competition and what's the brief that you're setting for the competition?
The idea is to find a gardener or a plantsman who has an idea about design which he can plant at the whole scale of the garden. I mean, so often I find that people know an enormous amount about plants, but they have real difficulty in thinking about a design which really relates to a place. That's what we were trying to do with the new path layout.
This is set in stone. This is going to be here.
This is what we're going to make a set of paths to this pattern,
Yeah.
and ask gardeners to respond by way, in no sense, of a provocation to those paths.
What are you looking for? Are you looking for something really radical here?
The best analogy I can give you, which is what I again said to the architects, is that they should think of themselves as designing a theatre. And any plants person or gardener can come in any succeeding generation and direct a production of the plants.
Drama.
Drama.
If you feel sufficiently inspired to take part in Hadspun's future, then go to our website and you'll find all the details of how to apply there. If, however, you want to do something a little more mundane and practical in your own garden this weekend, here are some suggestions.
If you're storing parsnips in the ground, there's an easy way to make sure you'll be able to dig them up even when the ground's frozen. Mulch between the rows with straw, hay or leaf mould, making sure that the top of the roots are exposed. They need frost to turn their starch to sugar for that characteristic Christmassy taste.
With the combination of wet and cold, your pots could easily become waterlogged, freeze and then crack. To prevent this, lift pots off the ground using pot feet or even stones. This will aid drainage and keep the air circulating around them.
If you've been taking part in the chili trial, you will undoubtedly have a lot of chilies to store. A way that I found works really well is to thread them up with some green gardening twine and a large needle. Push the needle through the stem rather than the fruit until you've got a rope of them, and then hang them up somewhere warm to dry. The secret of making them last is to get them really dry. And when they are fully dried out, you can keep them in a jar and they will last for literally years. Well, there's no going back now, is there? We've had the first frost, the borders are blasted.
They are. But, you know, at the same time as everything's dying, you just know it's the beginning of next year, don't you?
I wouldn't mind holding on to this here just a little bit longer. I don't like the cold very much.
Well, as long as there's sunshine, I don't mind the cold. In fact, obviously for the garden, I hope that it's a really cold winter. That's what we need. That's the end of today's programme, the end of this year's series of Gardener's World, but there's plenty coming in the next few weeks, particularly the special programmes that we made over the summer, which you'll get a chance to see again. And, of course, on December the 22nd, we've got our Christmas special programme, an extravaganza that will be a feast for all your senses. And Sarah Raven will be joining the three of us there. So, until then, bye-bye.